Welcome to the debate. So, there's this very specific physical response that gets triggered by the classic surprise party.
Oh, right. The good old jump scare.
Exactly. You walk into a dark room, you hit the light switch, and for just a fraction of a second, your amygdala registers pure threat. Shadows shift, voices yell out. Your sympathetic nervous system just immediately spikes your heart rate.
Yeah.
But almost instantly, your prefrontal cortex catches up, right? You recognize the balloons, you see the smiling faces of your friends, and that initial spike of adrenaline dissolves seamlessly into a socially safe rush of joy.
Right, because it's essentially a managed stress response. We rely entirely on the established social contract of a celebration. The recipient, implicitly understands that their physical safety was never actually compromised. We enjoy that brief physiological rush because the environment remains fundamentally secure.
Yes.
But imagine removing that social contract entirely.
Imagine if, instead of holding a birthday banner, the figure lunging from the shadows is wielding a live, lethal blade aiming directly for your throat.
Uh-oh.
Right? The brain has no safe baseline to return to. You are plunged instantly and violently into a genuine fight for survival. And this psychological whiplash brings us directly to our core focus today. As we continue our analysis of Gentrics' expanding multiverse on episode 8 of our show, we really have to confront the infamous birthday shock chapter in Act 2.
We absolutely do.
We are reevaluating Kenshin Sensei's teaching style, right? Specifically his decision to disguise a brutal life-or-death combat trial as an ambush on Xenix's 20th birthday. Now, I will formally concede my previous theories regarding Kenshin's underlying character, but I firmly maintain that his instructional methods rely on deeply reckless, genuinely traumatic combat conditioning.
And I have to say, I am sitting here feeling entirely, incredibly vindicated.
Oh, I'm sure you are.
I argued previously that Kenshin's abrasive realism was a necessary adaptation to their environment. I am fully prepared to defend this disguised birthday ambush not as reckless behavior, but as an absolute masterclass in survival conditioning. It is the perfect final exam for a world defined by extreme, unpredictable violence.
Look, I suppose I should simply address the glaring error in my prior analysis before we go any further. I am eating huge portions of humble pie today. I must unequivocally retract my central argument from our discussion in Show 4. I was totally, completely wrong.
Wow. I eagerly accept your concession. I mean, your previous framework was constrained by a fundamentally civilian understanding of threat assessment. And you didn't just offer a mild critique back then, you spun a rather elaborate, honestly awful, conspiracy theory regarding his motives.
Okay, I did. I sat here and forcefully argued that Kenshin Sensei was an opportunistic, evil manipulator. I looked at the grueling meat cleaver training regimens, the deployment of those combat robots, his intentionally abrasive demeanor.
Right.
And I deduced that he was a predatory strategist. I was convinced he was intentionally grooming a traumatized orphan to act as a meat shield against Eon Pax. I thought his sole motivation was to weaponize the Whistling Wind bloodline for his own tactical advantage.
It was an exceptionally cynical reading of Neo's text. You were projecting a level of malice that simply was not supported by the narrative framing at all.
Well, my premise was empirically invalidated by the revelations in Act 2 anyway. Neo provided the objective truth. Kenshin and his wife are not opportunists. They took in a shattered, grieving orphan and provided him with a stable, fiercely protective home for an entire year. They operate as deeply loving surrogate parents.
Exactly.
So, yes, I apologize. Kenshin is fundamentally a good man. However,
Here comes the pivot.
and I am pivoting sharply here to challenge your sense of total vindication. Being a loving surrogate father does not grant you a license to practice irresponsible psychological conditioning.
Okay, let's hear it.
His teaching methods remain categorically hazardous.
Orchestrating a high-stakes life-or-death ambush right before a young man's surprise 20th birthday party is not brilliance. It is a profound violation of trust. It's totally unhinged behavior.
Unhinged? I find that perspective so overly cautious. Let me explain why your revised stance still misses the functional reality of Neo's world. You're evaluating this test through the lens of like a codified, regulated martial arts academy down the street.
Because he is a teacher.
But we are analyzing the brutal reality of an expanding multiverse. Warlords like Aeon Pax slaughter entire bloodlines without warning. In that context, a scheduled, polite sparring match in a safe dojo proves absolutely nothing about a student's capacity to survive.
I mean, it proves they know the forms.
Forms don't save you from an ambush. The only conceivable way Kenshin could measure if Zeonix was truly ready for the lethal realities beyond their town was to bypass his conscious preparation entirely. A disguised, terrifying ambush is the only authentic metric of combat readiness.
I understand the theoretical justification, but we really need to examine the reality of how Kenshin actually executed this test. Neo details a genuinely chilling setup here. Zeonix wakes up on the morning of his 20th birthday, and his house is eerily deserted.
Right, the isolation phase.
Yeah, he wanders down to the local marketplace looking for his surrogate family. The vendors are acting cagey. They're creating this subtle sense of isolation, awkwardly deflecting his questions and pointing him toward the dojo. So he walks up to the dojo.
Which is his safe space.
Exactly. It's the single location he has learned to identify as a secure haven over the past year. He opens the doors, expecting the familiar presence of his master, and is instantly rushed by a masked assailant swinging a live blade.
It is a brilliantly designed tactical scenario. It completely strips away all environmental predictability.
But it induces an immediate trauma response. How is triggering a young man's worst psychological nightmare considered good teaching?
Well,
we know explicitly from the text that Zeonix's mind instantly flashes back to his family's murder at the hands of Aeon Pax's mercenaries. He doesn't view this as a test. He literally assumes this masked intruder has already slaughtered Kenshin and his wife. He screams, "How dare you dishonor this dojo?"
right, he's furious.
He is involuntarily reliving the most horrific day of his life. Forcing a student into a dissociative panic state could have easily shattered his mind rather than reinforcing his martial skills.
Okay, that is a compelling observation regarding his trauma. I'll give you that. Though I look at the whole thing entirely differently. You're prioritizing his immediate emotional comfort over his long-term physical survival.
No, I'm prioritizing not re-traumatizing a victim.
But Aeon Pax's assassins do not respect psychological boundaries. When a mercenary kicks your door off its hinges in the middle of the night, they aren't going to pause to ensure you are emotionally regulated for combat. Kenshin had to force that exact trauma response to see what was on the other side of it.
But Kenshin is his instructor. He's his surrogate father. He is not an active combatant against him.
Exactly. Which is precisely why Kenshin had to be the one to orchestrate it. Kenshin had to measure Zeonix's nervous system response when his safe space was violently breached. We have to contextualize this with his history.
You mean the attack on Sakar?
Right. Remember the response a year prior, when Zeonix first witnessed the town of Sakar burning. When Crater Steve initiated the attack on his family, Zeonix's initial biological response was to freeze. He was completely paralyzed by pure panic.
Which is a very normal response.
Sure, but fatal in this universe. Kenshin needed empirical proof of habituation. He needed to know, does this young man still freeze when the nightmare repeats itself, or does he bypass the panic and immediately engage the threat?
Well, he unquestionably engages the threat. And that brings us to the massive structural flaw in Kenshin's plan. Because Kenshin's brilliant little stress test completely backfired on a practical level. Kenshin severely miscalculated the sheer lethality of his own pupil.
Well, he did cut the margins rather thin.
Thin? Calling it thin is a massive understatement. Kenshin nearly lost his head.
Literally.
Literally.
Xionix doesn't merely block the incoming strike or attempt to disarm the masked intruder. He bypasses defensive posturing entirely and initiates the lethal finishing sequence of the Whistling Wind style.
Oh, it's so good.
It's the exact same technique that quite literally split Crater Steve in half a year ago. The atmospheric pressure drops, the wind starts vibrating around the blade, and Kenshin is forced to shatter the illusion, right? He screams, "I give up, you win," while ripping off his mask just a fraction of a second before being decapitated by his own student.
Which serves as the definitive proof that the exercise was a massive, undeniable success.
By almost dying.
Yes. Xionix didn't freeze. He actively, ruthlessly, and effectively protected his home against what he perceived to be a terminal threat. Kenshin almost dying is simply the inherent hazard of authentic, high-stakes combat conditioning. If the teacher isn't at risk, the simulation just isn't real enough.
I am not persuaded by that rationale for 1 second, because Kenshin's own wife violently rejects it.
Oh, man.
We cannot ignore the incredibly telling character dynamic that unfolds the moment Kenshin takes his mask off. The wife bursts out from the back room, marches directly up to her husband, and literally punches Kenshin in the face.
She certainly delivered a substantial strike. I laughed out loud reading it.
She is furious. She screams, "Are you an idiot? Are you trying to get yourself killed today? We agreed to only test him." I mean, I submit to you that when your own spouse physically attacks you for your teaching methods, you have officially crossed the line from rigorous instruction into sheer recklessness.
I don't know about that.
She recognizes that Kenshin's eccentricity caused him to lose control of the lesson. A master who can't predict his student's speed has failed to secure the primary variable of the test.
I interpret that sequence from a completely different angle. I found the wife's physical reaction to be a hilarious but necessary sociological anchor for the narrative. She is the grounding force that makes Kenshin function as a character.
By punching him?
Yes! Without her mitigating influence, Kenshin does appear to be a reckless fanatic obsessed with martial absolutism. But her intervention transforms the scene into a chaotic, deeply human family dynamic. She represents the civilian tether.
Okay, but he still almost died.
Yes, Kenshin failed to accurately calculate Xionix's strike speed, but that miscalculation is the ultimate triumph of a teacher. Xionix proved he possessed the lethal conviction necessary to wield the Whistling Wind style in a live environment. The core philosophy of the test remains totally valid.
But consider the profound cognitive dissonance of the scene's immediate resolution. We transition from an aborted decapitation straight into a bizarre social gathering. Right after the near-death physiological spike, the intentional triggering of severe PTSD, and the marital dispute where the wife punches the husband, the dojo doors swing wide open.
Surprise!
And the entire rebuilt population of Sakar jumps out with banners, roasted food, and gifts to celebrate his 20th birthday.
It is an incredibly wholesome demonstration of community.
It is deeply destabilizing. Let me offer a clearer analogy for why this fails psychologically. Inducing that level of combat stress and instantly expecting social joy is like throwing someone out of an airplane without a parachute, catching them by the shirt collar at the last possible second, and immediately handing them a slice of cake.
That is a very vivid image.
It's completely unhinged. The biological systems are simply too flooded with cortisol and adrenaline to process the celebration. You cannot violently manipulate someone's sympathetic nervous system and then throw a party expecting their brain to seamlessly transition back to a baseline of comfort.
But that oscillation is exactly what makes Gentrics' world so structurally compelling. You're analyzing this as a contradiction, but within the context of Pei to Shesh, it is a unified, necessary reality.
I just don't see how.
Because it demonstrates the profound integration of Xionix's found family and his broader community. The townspeople aren't just throwing a random party. They're expressing their enduring gratitude for his role in saving them from Crater Steve. It illustrates that brutal survival conditioning and genuine human connection are not mutually exclusive.
Well,
in fact, they are entirely symbiotic in this universe. You cannot afford the luxury of the birthday cake without having the drawn sword ready at the door.
Look, I will acknowledge that the community's intent is beautiful. The text notes that they celebrated late into the night, and Kenshin eventually provides him with a grave, grounded warning about the escalating dangers ahead before his departure. It serves as a meaningful narrative send-off.
It really does.
But I maintain my position that utilizing a disguised, simulated assassination as a delivery method for a final exam is a profoundly irresponsible way to manage a trauma survivor's development. Kenshin is extraordinarily fortunate he didn't end up in two pieces on his own floor.
And I maintain my position that the expanding threats of the multiverse demand precisely that caliber of extreme preparation. If Kenshin had codified the final exam with restrictive rules, point scoring, and safety parameters, Xeonix would have walked out of the gates of Sakaar harboring a fatal, false sense of security.
Right. We definitely disagree on the safety aspect.
The disguise test was a necessary, ugly triumph that yielded empirical proof he was finally ready to face the authentic threats waiting for him.
Well, it appears we have arrived at a very firm, albeit playful, deadlock today. I will gladly concede that Kenshin is a devoted surrogate father, and I formally apologize for my show-for conspiracy theories regarding his malicious intent. But I stand my ground that his instructional methodology almost precipitated a completely preventable tragedy.
And I will gladly accept that concession on Kenshin's character while standing my ground that the broader multiverse just does not reward pedagogical safety. The extreme boundaries of that test were exactly what Xeonix's nervous system required to ensure his survival. We'll have to leave it to the listener to weigh the evidence and decide whether the disguised birthday test went too far.
Agreed. Which brings our analysis of this specific chapter to a close. However, the concept of surviving extreme environments transitions perfectly into our next discussion.
Oh, I am highly anticipating where the narrative shifts next.
In our next meeting, we are officially leaving the relative safety and rebuilt community of Sakaar behind. Xeonix begins his journey north into the disputed territory known as Shine Solstice, and he immediately runs headfirst into the highly lethal, entirely unfamiliar threats of Act 2.
We will be conducting a rigorous breakdown of an incredible new ally, the aging mystic Shango. The physical rules governing this character are absolutely staggering. When Xeonix initially encounters him, Shane presents as a frail, battered 80-year-old man. But as the combat sequence unfolds, the text reveals he's actually only 30 years old.
Yeah, the reason for that rapid physical degradation is just a brilliant piece of world building. Shane wields the mystic axe of Shurix, which houses a rare elemental gem. You can conceptualize the function of that gem like the pressurization system in an aircraft flying at high altitude.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
It actively regulates and maintains his youth, keeping his internal life force stabilized against the harsh environment. But during a prior engagement, a mercenary shattered the axe and stole the half containing the regulating jack.
So the structural integrity of the cabin has been completely breached.
Exactly. With that symbiotic tether severed, the internal pressure drops to zero. Shane's very life force is violently venting out into the surrounding atmosphere. He's aging decades in a matter of hours, fighting against a rapid biological collapse.
It establishes a phenomenal visceral ticking clock for the narrative pacing, and the antagonist responsible for shattering that axe is the next major threat Xeonix must face, the Fuse Master, who happens to be Crater Steve's vengeful brother.
The Fuse Master wields a weapon that completely invalidates traditional defensive swordplay. He fights with a long steel staff entirely coated in highly volatile gunpowder, tipped with a burning fuse.
Right.
If his staff strikes anything with sufficient kinetic force, the ground, a tree trunk, or Xeonix's own parrying blade, the impact triggers a massive localized detonation right in the defender's face.
You attempt to block, and you suffer an explosion. You attempt to strike his weapon, and you suffer an explosion. It forces Xeonix to completely abandon the foundational rules of kinetic redirection that Kenshin just spent a year drilling into him. We invite you to join us for our next discussion as we analyze how Xeonix adapts to this explosive shift in combat style.
It is going to be a fascinating breakdown of martial adaptability. But before we conclude today, I want to leave you with one final thought to linger on, circling right back to the psychological reality of our opening discussion.
Let's hear it.
If a surprise party inherently requires a reliable baseline of safety for the brain to transition from panic to joy, What happens to a person's underlying psychology when they realize that in Gentrics' universe, the lights are never truly going to turn on? When you are conditioned to believe that every single shadow could actually be a lethal blade, how do you ever learn to simply enjoy the cake?
Wow, a very compelling question to leave us with.
Thank you for joining us for the debate.